control panel to submit your question. Next, a recorded version of this webinar will be available to you after the session. And lastly, your feedback is important to us. At the end of the webinar, a short survey will appear. Please consider taking a few moments to share your input with us. All right, John, please take it away.
Thank you. Sorry, I got stuck on mute there for a minute. Thanks very much. Great to be with you. Today, we're going to talk about a major trend in the world of application development, which we call at Forrester, which we call low-code development platforms. We're lucky enough to have someone who uses one of these platforms to share their experiences with us. But first, let's just get clear about what is going on. What are low-code development platforms, and why have they become such a factor in software strategies among enterprises? Next slide. Forrester, if you don't like the term low-code, you can blame us. We were the ones who came up with this term to describe a set of development platforms that we saw rising in popularity about 6 years ago, is when we started. And people were, developers were adopting these products as alternatives to Java coding or .NET C# coding, writing software and programming languages, essentially. We found that there were two characteristics that all of the products, and there are many, all of the products in this market had. One was that they offered a development approach that minimized or reduced the amount of coding, in some cases to zero, in other cases, as we'll see, not to zero, but just reduced it. And the reason that this was so interesting to developers is because with visual and declarative development techniques, developers oftentimes could create software a lot faster than they could if they wrote code. And this rise in interest roughly corresponded to the rise of digital transformation and digital business, where everybody was under the gun to create software a lot faster and deliver it a lot faster. The second characteristic was that these vendors began to offer business models that allowed customers to adopt at a very low cost in money, in time, in training, to get started, and then expand their financial commitment to the platform to reflect the value that they were getting. So as they built more applications, their spending expanded to reflect the value of those applications. So very different kind of an approach for developers. When we say declarative, development techniques, if you go to the next slide, what we're really talking about is moving from this, which is code in an editor, next slide, to something like this. This is a screenshot from LANSA. You can see it's a very different experience. You're defining elements, you're dragging and dropping the elements of applications onto a screen to, say, create a UI, a user interface, or a data map, or what have you. These declarative techniques can be quite powerful. We've seen organizations raise their productivity by factors of 10, sometimes even more, by adopting low-code platforms. Now, it's important to recognize, as I said in the beginning, that declarative development is actually a spectrum of techniques and tools, and all of them, products embrace the spectrum in different ways. All of the products can raise your development speed, and they're all really useful. The choices that I find developers make have a lot to do with the kinds of use cases they're building, but also their preferences. Sometimes it's just faster to write code than it is to use a declarative technique. Whereas in other cases, it's faster to use a declarative development technique than it is to write code. So when you look at this market, and there are, like I said, there are lots of companies in this market. There's something like 100 vendors out there. You will find a range here. You'll find folks that say, vendors that say, hey, our product is designed for no code. We want you to be able to deliver software without any coding at all. Then you'll see folks that mix visual development and coding, that give you the opportunity to work when it makes sense with the declarative development tools, but then exit to JavaScript or some other code for portions of your applications as it makes sense to do so. And then you've got what I call the code behind approach, where you can work in a declarative environment, but you can also then work on the code behind those declarative views of the application. So you can sort of switch back and forth, if you like, between a visual representation of the software you're building and the representation in code. And some developers, some teams like that approach. It's all in scope, guys, and your choices depend a lot on who you are and how your developers prefer to work. There are lots of choices out there that support all the different variations on software strategies. Next slide. So, as I mentioned, low code has become a very big trend in software development generally. At Forrester, we do an annual survey of developers worldwide. You can see about the most recent one was about 3,200 developers, and one of the questions the last 2 years that we've been asking is about their use of low code to gauge the relative popularity and the level of adoption. So you can see that in the most recent survey, fully half of the developers reported that their teams are now either using a low code product or planning to adopt a low code platform within the next 12 months. This is significant. This is a really significant, level of adoption. And again, we find that it's grown over the years, and we expect it to continue to grow. If you look at the third bar, the third pair of bars on this chart, this is the most interesting finding for me out of these survey results. I think represents a decline in the negative attitude that some developers have towards low code. There are developers who say essentially real men code, and so don't bother me with declarative. The number of developers that I encounter, and I think it's backed up by this survey, who have that attitude is declining. And again, the reason is you got to deliver fast, and if you can't meet those requirements, you've got to maybe change the work from coding to no code from coding to low code. Next slide. So we've got some good adoption going here. Let's talk a little bit more about why. I mentioned speed. Speed of development is really the foundation of the demand for low code development platforms. But we're learning more about the other factors that come into play. This is a finding that I think is really important to recognize. Think about when 5-6 years ago, think about what was going on. Most companies were coming out of a posture where they were really hunkered down to get through the recession. They were starting to see growth possibilities, and they started to invest in software again, and started to invest in becoming essentially digital versions of themselves. That meant they had to build a lot of software. It meant there was a very healthy appetite for innovation. There was a very strong focus on customers and doing well by customers using technology. And look at these results. They say to me that low-code platforms became a very important strategy to achieve that growth and that innovation and that focus on customers. The developers who don't use low-code and don't have plans to adopt low-code are much less connected to innovation and growth and customer activity than the developers who are working in low-code. I think this is important. I think a lot of developers in Java and so forth that I talk to are essentially tied down maintaining a state, older applications, and they just don't have the time or the bandwidth to look at new activities. And so, a lot of companies brought in low code and set up essentially a different development motion to get after the growth opportunities that they saw. Next slide, please. So very important connection between low code development platforms and innovation. There's also a finding that's emerging about the connection between low code and the decentralization of application development talent. Basically, we sometimes call it the developer diaspora. It's pushing developers out of central IT and into business units so that they can work much more effectively with the business leaders, understand the requirements much better, and therefore deliver software that is much more quickly, that is an accurate reflection of those requirements. This first became visible to us really in the last couple of years. You can see that develop apps more quickly remains a key concern, and that was like I say, that was really the bedrock, that requirement that built this market. But now we're seeing an effect on the way that development's being organized as well. And by the way, part of this trend to decentralized development is to get business people much more closely involved, and in some cases to basically empower business people to serve themselves by building their own applications. It's often called the citizen developer phenomenon. That all gets wrapped up here. And you can see also innovation coming through in these findings as well, in terms of why people are adopting these products. Next slide, please. So what kinds of use cases, what kinds of applications are developers building with low-code platforms? Some people who are skeptical will tell you low-code is a phenomenon for departmental apps. It's just like Lotus Notes was back in the day. Not really, not at all, actually. There's a big thrust towards to build web applications. A lot of those web applications are very broad in scope. They're used across the company. They're used by multiple departments. In many cases, they're used by customers directly. There's also a big focus on business process, as you can see here on the second bar. So automating business process has become a really important priority, among enterprises, and low-code platforms are really playing a very important role there. I want to call your attention to the finding that's second from the bottom: core business applications. This, by the way, this is the way we ask the question: core business applications, e.g., ERP, so your core record-keeping systems. 16% of developers said, yeah, that we're building those use cases using low-code. This is a really important finding. It's not the majority case that people are building core record-keeping or core business process automation, but it's there, and I think it's going to grow. Anecdotally, I'm hearing more and more of the conversations I'm having about low-code involve using low-code to automate these very critical, mission-critical applications. Why? Because a lot of them are very old, and they need to be modernized. They need to be more flexible, and low-code is emerging as an option here. So lot of use cases, but and broadening out into core business applications over the next, I think, 5 years or so. Next slide, please. So who are these developers? There's a huge population of developers worldwide. Who are the developers that are willing, that are motivated and willing to adopt low-code platforms? They have certain characteristics, as you can see. They are more likely to be women. Isn't that interesting? Development is really a man's game, but Low coders are more likely to come from the fairer sex. They are a little bit younger, not tremendously younger. 4 years is not a huge delta. And this is not, low code is not a game for new programmers, we find, new developers, we find. Oftentimes, very experienced developers will adopt low code, but they do tend to be a little bit younger. And the last finding sort of supports that developer diaspora point that we were on earlier, in that people that use low code, developers that use low code, are more likely to be embedded in a department building apps for that department's work, to help that department's work, than they are to be working in a central IT organization. Although there is adoption in central IT as well. So a little bit different. These are interesting if you're thinking about staffing and bringing in a low-code platform and thinking about staffing. These are sort of some of the clues of who you'd look for as your champions to really take best advantage of low-code. Next slide, please. Now, I mentioned citizen developers earlier, and this is an important dimension of this market. The data that I've been sharing with you so far was drawn from our developer survey. These are professional developers. They identify as professional developers. That's how they make their living. There's another group out there, which is even larger, probably 1 billion people worldwide, who are business people who work today with Excel spreadsheets or Access databases or so forth and so forth. And there's an opportunity to incorporate these folks and their smarts about the business and their aptitude for technology, incorporate them into our software strategy. Now, there is a branch of the low-code platform market that caters to citizen developers. It is a separate branch from the vendors that focus on empowering professional developers. And what I've done on this slide is try to contrast the two. They're quite different because the users of the products are very, very different. Business people are not professional developers. They think about business and business constructs first. They're not familiar with the structure of applications, and they tend to want something that's very quick, allows them to work very quickly. Developers are exactly opposite. They want control. Many of them want deep control, even if it's with a declarative interface. The important thing here is that if you're going to tackle if you're going to try to empower your business people, don't offer them a product that's designed for professional developers. They will run away screaming. It'll be too complicated. It just will not work out for them. You've got to focus on a product that actually is designed for them, and it's going to be like I say, it's going to be designed in a different way than the products that are designed for professional developers. It's very important not to get these two confused as you approach citizen developers. Next slide, please. Another potential complexity here for you to figure out as you look at the low-code market is your approach to process automation. We've already seen that that process automation is a very, very important use case that people tackle with low-code, but they actually have 4 major options in the low-code market, including low-code products that really go deep on process automation functionality, like case management, like process simulation, and so forth, like RPA, robotic process automation. And the vendors, it's important to understand, if you're really going to drill into process automation as your primary use case, well, then you've really got to pick a vendor that is very strong in process automation. And the tricky part here is that all of the vendors in each of these 4 categories have features to help you automate processes. So, so really very carefully sorting through your requirements, and then finding the vendor that's going to best serve your process needs is another really tricky part of picking vendors in this market. Next slide, please. And lastly, I've talked a lot about products here. Some about the people using the products, but it's very important to recognize that adopting a product has to be part of an overall strategy for delivering software, and this includes your development process. Low-code products allow you to deliver software really, really quickly. Well, that just means that your governance of the software process has to be able to keep up with that pace of delivery. You get an opportunity to align closely with the business, maybe by embedding developers in the business. Well, for a lot of organizations, that's a very different organizational structure, and the reporting and the ways of working between business people and developers really change. If you're gonna build a lot of applications, if you bring in a low-code platform, you can build applications quickly. That means you're going to end up with a lot of them. That means you've got a portfolio to manage. The applications change, and particularly when you're working with innovation. So just adopting the right product that's just part of the solution overall. You've got to also have a strategy that takes in orgs, skills, governance, and change management of applications and your organization as you go forward. Things are going to happen a lot faster than they did before. So with that, I will thank you for your attention. I hope that I've helped. And now we're lucky enough to have someone who has actually used low-code in anger with us to share his experiences. Welcome, Keith Arteaga, from the IT manager from Brunswick Bowling. Keith, welcome. And thanks very much for sharing.
Thanks for having me, John.
So, Keith, Brunswick Bowling is maybe a self-descriptive company name, but just to make sure we understand the current state of the company, could you give us a little bit of background on it before we dive into your experiences with LANSA?
Sure. Yeah, as you said, we've been pretty much in business since the 1800s, but we're a global company. We were separated from our corporate parent about 4 years ago, so we're privately held, small to medium-sized business. We have very complex business. We sell equipment, so there's contracts and installations, and we sell parts and supplies, so that's higher volume, different kind of sale, as well as products to consumers like bowling balls, bags, and shoes, and that's yet a different kind of business process. So we have a smallish to medium-sized business with a very wide product line, and we sell and distribute everywhere, from Pakistan to the White House.
Interesting. And as you say, it's actually a rather complex business with different customer types and channels and products. Very interesting. So the reason we're here is to learn about your experience with low code. What was the major use case that prompted you to look at a low code software solution, Keith?
We had I would call it a quote to cash system for our capital equipment business. That's our highest revenue and most complicated part of the business. And it kind of managed all of the interactions between the sales force, who's finding opportunities and trying to frame in this is a long sales cycle with capital equipment. It could be a year and a half. Mm-hmm. And it involves contract managers, purchasing people, freight, credit approval. So we had an old Visual Basic application that was on a old database. It wasn't really a relational system. Mm-hmm. And that developer had left the company, and it was really kind of a one-person show. And the other guys on the team were a little more of a legacy ERP type developers. They weren't real familiar with developing in the Microsoft stack per se. And this application is critical to our business, but it had to be rewritten. It just wasn't supportable in its state. So we had to take it on. It was probably not the best use case for diving into a new development platform because it was a very complex project, but it worked out very well.
Interesting. Keith, I've seen that many, many times where people don't start with something small and low risk. They actually have to start with something that's critical. So obviously, the business benefits here were, without automation of this process, this order cash process you mentioned, you're just not going to collect revenue. You're not going to grow. It was critical to the business, wasn't it?
Yes, and we really wanted to make sure we didn't make the same mistake of kind of having this one-off application. We wanted to make sure we had an environment that multiple people could learn how to use. We could bring the data, it was a little more data independent. We could put the data on our ERP system or on somewhere else. We wanted it to be web. We really didn't want to distribute software to all of our users. The salespeople are all over the country, and some of them are out of country. So we really had kind of this list of needs that we needed to go shopping for.
And when you tackled this, I think before you settled on LANSA, you looked at some other options. I think you looked at open source, didn't you? What was that process like?
Yeah, we had a person on our team that had done some experimentation, web enabling some of our legacy ERP applications, and he had kind of cobbled together all kinds of open source libraries and that we had embedded, and it worked. But when he was a real, if you're looking at one of your other slides, he was way off on the spectrum of super high control, deep dive. And the other people on the team, we kind of went down the path of trying to teach them, but they surfaced a lot of concerns about maintainability, about standards, about longevity. A lot of open source is great, but if you break it with an upgrade or something, you might not find that wherever you got it from, that path could be dead.
Right.
So they were just really concerned that we were kind of going to get a little too loose for this, for this critical app. Plus, all the other things we started to think about, when we were thinking about this area of our business.
Interesting. So, how did you discover LANSA? How did you come across LANSA and come to adopt it?
Well, probably, looking out, Google searching, partly. LANSA has a lot of experience with one of our back-end platforms. We're on with the IBM I-Series, and LANSA has been a player in that market for a long time, doing some basic, I guess, screen scraping kind of stuff. So we were aware of who they were, but we weren't aware of how far, they've taken their products. And so we, when we started looking for a third party instead of doing more of a open source, because of the back end we had, LANSA jumped out at us, and we reached out to a couple of vendors, but LANSA stood out in what they had with their visual framework. And they brought a couple of people into our office to do a proof of concept. We didn't have to pay them for that. They said, we'll come here and we'll spend a day or two coding up part of your use case to show you, how it works. And it was a nice little workshop we did. We had our developers in the room and went through it, and the guys, after we got done, we kind of went through our requirements and said, yeah, they seem to meet all of our requirements. We decided to go forward.
Were there specific requirements that really
Yes.
favored LANSA?
Well, we really wanted a single platform. My team is older. They're not accustomed to kind of a lot of client server type development. They're not accustomed to web development at all. And so we really wanted one platform that could handle the UI as well as the back end. So LANSA checked that box. They also have some frameworks we could use, so we didn't have to mess around building menus and security. We care about security, but LANSA had kind of some pre-built structures that fit our project, so we didn't have to spend a lot of time doing kind of the framework. It already existed.
Right.
And I think, a vendor that has technical support versus an open source, a person you can call and say, hey, we need a little help with this. And so we wanted to make sure we had a vendor that offered that as well. And also a mobile version. We know eventually things have to be done on the phone, and LANSA demonstrated a vision for enabling our legacy ERP guys to build apps that you can actually use on a phone.
Awesome. So the big reveal, Keith, were you able to deliver the app? Did you deliver it quickly? Give us a little sense of what you were able to accomplish.
Yeah, we did deliver the app. Like I said, it was a very complicated app. It's got 40 or 50 screens, and like I said, it covers many business processes. We're uploading and downloading documents. We're sending emails from the app. The guys had to go through the initial learning curve of the toolkit. That went faster than what they were going through, trying to figure out how to cobble together all these other pieces we had. And once they spent, 3 or 4 weeks kind of going through, they had, some online training, which was really good that LANSA had. They started building stuff, and we were able to launch the app, do a 100% cutover successfully, very few issues. Users it was well received, and it brought all of that information into our other existing IT processes, whether they be business intelligence or automated file management, things that we do with other systems we kind of pulled in. But yeah, the guys did a great job, and it's funny you mentioned Lotus Notes earlier. We actually, the guy that pioneered our open source retired, and we had a guy on our team that was more of an infrastructure guy, but he had some Lotus Notes experience. So we showed him the LANSA platform and said, hey, we'd like to, if you want to be an application developer, take a look at this. And if I went over to his cube right now, he'd be working in that environment. So he's, we kind of added a guy to our team that wasn't originally an application developer.
Oh, interesting. Interesting. So actually, you mentioned that the app was well received. You had a number of constituencies that you had to serve with this app, didn't you? That must have been a great relief. Did you do anything like test out? Did you do prototypes and so forth to let people know what was coming and get their feedback as you were building the app?
Yes, we did. We had the benefit of having, we were replacing an app, so we already had language in terms of business language to talk about relative to what we were replacing. But we used LANSA along the way to demonstrate screenshots, demonstrate flow from one screen to another, just to demonstrate different use cases. So we probably met with users, it was probably every 2 or 3 weeks along the way, and just to make sure we're on the right course, and it worked out well.
So do you, again, speed being such an important element and a motivator for folks, do you think, did you conclude that you were able to deliver this application faster than you would have with the open source approach you were looking at?
I think so, yes. Seeing them be productive after getting through, some of the initial training on the tool, and being able to course correct as we met with users and their requirements got refined once they saw something on a screen or had an idea how to make something better. And after we launched, being able to fix a bug or add functionality, which we've done, those things not only are faster, but the team prefers to work in this environment now when they have to go back to some of their older stuff. Kind of bummed out about it. So we did an add-on. We did a second app to enable our field service team to schedule their work. They were using kind of a spreadsheet approach. And so we built a lighter application for field service scheduling. It's kind of the next step of delivering a contract after you ship the product. Our technicians have to install it. And that one, we used the material design, the Google material design framework from LANSA, and it's a mobile first. And just about a month ago, we kind of showed our users how to use it on their phone. And so here we are. And, nice. Vision accomplished. We wanted to get functionality down to the phone. And this framework from LANSA made that very easy.
Awesome. So we've got a number of people on the phone, I'm sure, who are looking at this, thinking about the opportunity in their shops. I made a plea to look at more than product, to look at the whole strategy. What advice would you give to an IT leader, Keith, who's looking at getting into low code? What do they really need to do and think about to be successful?
Well, I think you really have to think about the business, and that means maybe you let go of some control of the development environment. You might have a developer that treats their work like it's art, and that's appreciated, but I've had people spend maybe way too much time trying to get a box to look just right or something like that. You have to kind of give up a little control and accept what the tool has to offer because you're trying to deliver business value. There's still a little bit of learning at first. It is a very robust toolkit. So from our perspective, our guys learned it pretty fast though, even though it was new concepts to old dogs, so to speak. And you really want to work with a vendor that's got a vision to invest in the platform, and they can communicate that vision and you can see it. And we've seen it as we've done upgrades to our toolkit from LANSA, and they've added new functionality. We've been able to take advantage of that. So that's what's most important to me.
That's great. Thank you, Keith. And listen, congratulations, by the way. It sounds like you've accomplished some great work for Brunswick. And that's awesome. Delivering a complex core application is never easy. And thank you very much for sharing your learnings with us. If we all share as a community, we'll all do better. So thank you. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Yad.
Thank you very much, John and Keith. Hello, everybody. My name's Yad from LANSA, and in this last part of the webinar, I'm just going to take you through two things: how we position the LANSA low-code platform relative to what John was talking about, and how we address some of the business challenges that Keith was talking about as he was answering some of John's questions. So Ali, if you'd do the next slide for me, thank you. If I were to use just one slide in the little time that I have left, it would be this one, because it describes what our real aim is, and that is to deliver a low-code development platform that allows you to build your business applications faster, better, and at a lower cost. Faster, that is the primary motivation. Businesses want to get their applications built and delivered to market much quicker than they were able to in the past. But in terms of building applications better, it's to be able to address some of the challenges that Keith talked about, like maintainability, for example. That's really key for applications that you're developing over the long term. And lower cost can be delivered through things like increased developer productivity, which of course is really important for customers using the platform. Next slide, please. It's really important these days to be able to build applications that work seamlessly across mobile, web, and desktop, and that look really good. This is just a few examples of applications built in the platform. But user experience is a really important element of building applications these days, and it's a key driver in terms of getting user adoption and high levels of user adoption. So being able to build not just modern applications, but attractive and easy to use applications is a really important factor in terms of delivering their success. Next slide, please. Some of the challenges that we hear from IT departments like Brunswick are some of the things that you see here. So the ability to handle, how you get away from having to handle multiple languages. If you're building web apps, typically you need the ability to develop in a whole range of different languages. That can affect your developer productivity and access to skills. You might be moving platforms, in which case you need to reduce risk. And the IT department want to regain control of the entire development process. And of course, some of the things that Keith talked about were the need to have a single platform really to do this on, and moving to the web and moving to mobile was going to be an important element. So addressing all those challenges is really important for many customers looking at low code to address their application development requirements. Next slide. I put this slide in to talk a little bit about where we fit in terms of low code suitability for different application requirements. If you can tap that, thank you. A lot of low code or no code solutions are focused below this line, departmental solutions that what John described as citizen developers could use to build the kinds of applications that they need to do their job better. But LANSA focuses really in the next tier. We provide the tools that let enterprise IT and professional developers build the kinds of applications that they need going forward. Applications that are increasingly mission critical to the business, that have a higher level of complexity and typically a higher level of functionality. So we focus much more on equipping and enabling enterprise IT and their development teams to build applications for the business. And if you go to the next slide, please, we see the low-code market changing and fragmenting into different kinds of solutions. So John talked a little bit about this too, and it was interesting the way he positioned it. But here on the left, I have no-code solutions, typically where there isn't any code at all, maybe used by departmental users for a range of solutions. And it is those kinds of people who perhaps have good Excel spreadsheet skills or able to create Salesforce reports that can pick up those kinds of tools and use them to build the applications that they need. Low code, we're seeing that fragment into both model-based and language-based approaches. And of course, there is some overlap between the two. LANSA very much falls into the language-based category. We have some graphical tools and we have some coding tools as well. And that's really designed to equip IT and their professional developers to build anything from a simple mobile app right through to a complex system of record application that's running the business, and everything in between. So we provide language with a very high level language with a high level of control. And then full code on the right hand side is what I mean by traditional development using traditional languages to build applications. Next slide. So just a couple of things that really distinguish the LANSA platform. The first is that we want to provide unlimited reach in that platform for all the applications that you want to build, regardless of where you intend to deploy them. So it's a truly cross-platform solution, allowing you to build your applications once for desktop, web, and mobile and deploy them anywhere. Because we've been around a long time, we have a lot of experience for on-premise solutions, but we also have done a lot of work with cloud too. And migration from on-premise to cloud is something that a lot of organizations are looking at, and something that this low-code platform can really help make easy to do. And of course, running against virtually any database at the back end is important. That can be different depending on the different deployment platform that you intend to run against. Next slide. And rather than having to use many different platforms for building your applications, our goal is to let you do it all on a single platform. So if you're building an internet application, for example, you might require a different set of tools, frameworks, languages, plugins to build the browser, the front end of the client application, the back end of the application. That can differ depending on what platform you're running at the back end, and the middleware or the transport layer that's running across the internet. And you may need to master dozens of languages to be able to do that. With LANSA, we replace all of those languages with one platform and one language that lets you build every part of the application. And the goal there really is that once developers are trained and up to speed with being able to use the platform, they can build every part of the application. So you don't need to have different teams focused on the front end, different teams on the back end. You can have the same developers working across the entire application and make them much more productive as a result. Next slide. Our goal is to be able to deliver everything inside a single integrated development environment that's easy to learn and easy to use. And it's an easy way to move existing applications to mobile and web, to replace dozens of other programming languages in the way I just described, and to be able to extract or abstract the business process from some of the underlying technology. So the coding language that we have in LANSA is very much focused on business process rather than the underlying technology. So you can concentrate on the business process and how that's delivered. And the platform can take care of making sure it runs effectively on mobile, on web, in the cloud, or on premise. The goal here really is to be able to build everything inside a single IDE where you won't ever need to drop out of that IDE, even when you come up against what in other low-code platforms could be limitations that force you to drop out of the platform and go back to traditional coding. That never really happens in LANSA because we have a coding language. It means that even when you come up against complex process requirements or complex integration requirements, all of those can be handled inside the single development platform. Next slide. So this is the way we really contrast Visual LANSA and our low-code approach. We really talk about low-code without some of the low-code limitations that you might see elsewhere. So traditional software development on the left requires lots of developers, potentially different developers focused on different parts of a web application, using a whole range of different languages, tools, frameworks, and so on. Other low-code tools take a lot of that pain away by giving you a single platform to build your application. But when you do hit those limitations, they do sometimes force you to drop out and go back to traditional coding, and therefore give you traditional code to maintain from that point going forward. The Visual LANSA approach is really about low-code development without limitations, so that you can build your applications with fewer developers, but equip those developers to be able to build every part of the application and do it in a single platform, a single environment that gives them all the power and flexibility that they need to build every part of the application. Next slide. So in summary, going back to where I started, our goal is to provide a low-code development platform that allows you to build applications faster, better, and at a lower cost. If you tap the button one more time, please. This is where our customers tend to use us a lot. They want to build applications once and deploy them anywhere. Very often we're part of a digital transformation, like we were at Brunswick, being able to take an existing application or an existing process and use the tool to modernize it and build a modern version of the application that can work right across the business. For IT departments, it helps put them back in control of the process, can help them to address the skills gap, certainly can reduce the risk of moving between different platforms, mitigating some of that risk. And some of the elements that we have in the platform certainly help to enforce things like standards and policies and best practice across the development process. So with that, that's pretty much where I wanted to stop. Ali, I'm going to hand back to you for the Q&A.
Okay, great. Thanks, Yad. I know we had a couple of people join a little bit late, and there's a few questions regarding if this webinar will be recorded, and it is. You will receive an email with a link to the recording within the next 24 to 48 hours. And another question here, Keith, this might be directed at you. Did you, in your experience with LANSA, Steve's asking, did you do a proof of concept with LANSA, the LANSA team?
Yes, we did.
Can you talk about that process, what it looked like, how long it took?
Sure. It was very fast, really. You know, a few weeks to get a couple of people here in our building, but we, you know, we got in a room and we demonstrated the problem we were trying to solve, showed the old application. We were fortunate that, you know, we had something we were replacing, and talked about, you know, what we wanted to do differently, how it should work differently, and really didn't know what LANSA could do other than what we saw on the website. And they had a person in the room with us that was very familiar and was able to take our use case and actually start having an interaction with our developers, and was able to say, oh, you're going to need a menu, you're going to need a screen, you're going to want to validate this data, you're going to want to read and write an update, and you're going to, you know, and just started building it. And it, you know, actually had a kind of a little workable prototype at the end of our session. And it was very impressive. And you know, we went through the back end, what he was doing and how he used the tool, so our developers could see the toolkit, the IDE, and they could see what the result could be. And that was a very helpful exercise for us.
That's great. And here's kind of a follow-up question. Now, there is a free trial of Visual LANSA. Did you use that free trial at all, or did you just start developing, you know, once the final decision was made to go with LANSA?
We did not use the free trial.
Okay.
No. Once we saw it, you know, we got a full day almost, you know, digging in and playing with it and going back and forth with an expert. We were pretty convinced at that point, so we didn't feel the need to take that step.
Mm-hmm. Here's a question from David here. He's asking about the security layer, logins, two-factor logins, one-time code. You know, that might be a more in-depth question we take offline, but are you able to speak to any of that?
You're referring to me?
Yeah, about the security layer.
Yeah.
Or yeah, feel free to jump in as well.
Yeah, we're currently not using a multi-factor. We authenticate, we wanted our users to, most of our users are also our ERP users, so we wanted to authenticate against that, and that worked out really well. So our users authenticate against, they use the same credentials as they use on the ERP system. And then the Visual LANSA framework had a lot of controls in terms of allowing users to access, read, write, or update different parts of the application. So in our case, because we have contract management, logistics, and freight, and salespeople, there were certain parts of the application that it's like, you can view it, but you know, we don't want you to change it. That's for the contract management team to change. It was very easy to secure parts of the application based on a user role or a department.
That's great. Thank you.
Ali, just to add one more on the security question. Absolutely, the platform does support two-factor authentication and can integrate with additional security components. Security itself is a big topic and certainly could warrant a webinar of its own. But I'd be happy to pick up specific security questions after the webinar. Happy to follow up with anybody who has more questions on that. I believe you asked about OWASP guidelines. Yes, that is absolutely something we follow. So if you need any more information, please let us know. We'll be happy to get back to you.
Great, thanks. You know, Philip was asking as well about the length of the Visual LANSA trial, and it is available for 60 days. We are working on enhancing that experience, so it's available from either LANSA.com, our homepage, or developer/center, or LANSA.com/developer center. We can send the link out as well. But there's a learning community for Visual LANSA developers where there's educational materials, there's many different types of how-to video tutorials if you're interested in building web or mobile. So that's a great community where you can learn more about Visual LANSA and the trial itself. All right, I think we're coming up against the hour here. I wanted to thank John, Keith, and especially Yad for taking time, and also everyone who's attended to come and listen to what we have to say. And Keith, it's always a pleasure working with you. I learned about your story, you know, about a year ago, and it's exciting to hear where you've come from to where you're going. So on behalf of everyone here at LANSA, thank you for your time. And there is a survey that's going to pop up after the session ends. If you have a moment to answer the 4 questions, please consider doing so. We really appreciate hearing from you. Thanks, everyone. At this time, you may now all disconnect.